I stayed in the old time zone. Okay, here we go. All right, dear distinguished guests, we are getting started. Thank you for being with us here in Dubai and also online throughout the world. On behalf of the Geneva Science and Diplomacy Anticipated Jester, I'm pleased to welcome you today to this session on the deployment of the Global Greenhouse Gas Watch Initiative, boosting the engagement of the private sector. Now, we have chosen this relatively long title to kind of pay credit to the necessary macro and micro perspective that is needed for a systemic change to better respond to climate challenges ahead of us. And as Masamba Tioye, the project executive of UNFCCC Innovation Hub, highlighted just yesterday, innovation is needed as the pull factor and open science as the push factor to address climate change with radical collaboration. My name is Marion Sherling. I'm an innovation sociologist and I work with JESSA as a senior program manager and will moderate this session. And please allow me to, at now at the beginning, quickly frame the conversation for you. At the last JESSA summit, which is a global dialogue on breakthroughs ahead of us in multilateralism, we had a panel discussion on keeping check on Earth vital science. And there we explored the question what it means to equip people to make better decisions in front of weather and climate hazards. Now, today we take a slightly different angle to that question, and we are exploring on what does it take to enable effective multilateralism through engaging the private sector. Jester, for those who don't know our foundation, we are a Swiss foundation. We are operating through public um, private partnerships, and we have specialized in multi stakeholder engagement, an approach that I would like to socialize with you today. So, in a few words, what we do is we bring scientists to the table of multilateralism to give the scientific community more weight in conversations related to global governance. We have over 1,000 leading scientists from around the world that work with us identifying major breakthroughs in the next 5, 10, 25 years, which they describe in the Gesta Science Breakthrough Radar. We bridge the gap between science and diplomacy by sharing results of the scientific anticipation um, with just the other communities. And we accelerate those responses to major global challenges. And then an important piece of what we do is the translation. So we are translating those responses to concrete actions that can be implemented on a global scale, which ultimately can guide the development of science. Now, before I present our distinguished speaker today. A word of thanks to all of those that contributed to the preparation of this panel with our friends from the WMO, with Lars Peter Richard Gard, also Masamba Tioye, which I just have cited, and his team, and Marie Hood, who is the executive director, impact translator at JETSA. With us today, we have to my right Jean-Noël Thibault. He's the director of the Copernicus Services at the European Center for Medium Range Weather Forecast. We have Yu Zhuang, assistant director for climate policy at the International Air Transportation Association, IATA. And we have Oliver Marchand, global head of climate research at MSCI. Thank you for having accepted the invitation, being with us today. Now, breakthroughs and disruption in and through science and technology, they are occurring at a very fast pace. I think we all agree. And that can include decarbonization to Earth system modeling, topics that we are looking at in our breakthrough radar. Now, science and disruptive technology developed in the world's most advanced institutes will reshape how we care about environment. And this is why at Jester we bring different communities together, the academic, diplomatic, citizen, and impact community to anticipate possible advances in emerging scientific topics, ultimately to implement very concrete hands-on initiatives, projects, and solutions. Now, Jean-Noël, you are, I would say, a leading figure in the field of atmospheric data assimilation. It has fascinated you for quite a long time. And I think we can even say for decades. And you held prestigious director roles within the European Center for Medium Range Weather Forecast. And in this context, you worked with WMO on the Global Greenhouse Gas Watch initiative. So we could fill, I think, entire days for exploring with you the respective breakthroughs in meteorology. But without getting too technical now, let us set the ground for our discussion today to look into the G3 W initiative, what it's trying to achieve. So could you explain to our diverse audience what is it and what makes it unique in your perspective?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Marianne. And indeed, I'm not from the World Meteorological Organization. As you said, I'm from ECMWF. And I also have to apologize in advance. I'm stepping in for my colleague, Richard Engelen, who should have been here, but who is unfortunately unable to come today. So yes, G3W, the global greenhouse gas watch. What is the background? So basically, in order to strengthen the decision basis for climate change mitigation action, at the last WMO Congress, 193 governments endorsed the development of this initiative, G3W. And so what are the key elements? It's really to build on what has been already done by the meteorological community for numerical weather prediction and climate monitoring. So it's about integration, so integrated global observing system with open near real-time international exchange of observations. There is a dimension of the 24/7 operational system for modeling and assimilating flux estimation, and internationally coordinated intercomparison and verification of model outputs. So it is a framework, and it is a coordination activity. So the primary output that we envisage for this is a consolidated top-down monthly estimates of greenhouse gas fluxes at a scale of 1 degree, so 100 kilometer or so, with the goal ultimately to reach maybe 10 or maybe 1 kilometer, but perhaps we will go back to this in a minute. So who would be the users? Who would be the target of this initiative? So UNFCCC parties, of course, in support of the global stocktake. And it will be quite important in 2028 and beyond. Regional and local users who can downscale and adapt the products to their resolution. Carbon markets, verification of for verification of offsetting, for example, and also the research community, because it's very complex problem. Mixing observations, modeling, and so forth to provide this type of estimations. So we need everybody on board, and of course the IPCC for emission pathways and future scenarios. That would be a good target audience as well. And maybe I will finish there. The G3W estimation must be done openly. So all parties, interested parties, need to contribute and participate. Transparency is very important. So free, unrestricted access to our exchange of observations and also output data. And also it's very important, like we do in meteorology, to use documented methodologies and algorithms so that there is a full transparency about what we are doing. So I will stop here for the time being.
Thank you, Jean-Noel, and you followed my ask to not get too technical. But I think what we can take out, what you just have said, is that you're really looking into how to operationalize open science with the initiative. Now, I'm very curious to understand how far are we from that very ambitious goal to have such a fine resolution of 1 by 1 kilometer. What is the timeline?
Okay, so that's a difficult question, but what is important to mention is that already some initiatives exist, and WMO will provide, or the D3W will provide the framework for coordination. But there is an initiative which I'm more familiar with in Europe called the CO2 Monitoring and Verification Support Capacity. So we are already doing it. The resolutions that we are talking about at the moment are probably 2 degrees or so, and we are getting there. Uh, Resolution on its own doesn't mean much if you don't link it to the accuracy you are after, and the accuracy is depending on the users you are talking about. So that's an important aspect. But we are working hard on improving the resolution and the accuracy of the product. And the European Commission, which has mandated ECMWF to run this CO2 monitoring verification support capacity, which will feed into G3W, um, is making use of a future Sentinel satellite called CO2M. So the hope is that there will be a dedicated CO2 mission launched in 2026, 2027, perhaps 2 satellites, perhaps 3 satellites, so giving a global coverage. And we hope that with additional in situ observations and modeling information, we'll make really a tangible progress into the improvement of the anthropogenic emission products.
Thank you so much. So this could be a way for private sector to engage. You just described that there's a strong component on satellite driven data, and I understand that we need more data on the ground to kind of validate and get more precision in.
Absolutely, because even with the highest precision satellite information that we will have, satellites only measure what is in the air, so atmospheric concentration, so greenhouse gas concentration. What we are after are the emissions. So for this, we need uh, to invert this information into emissions, and for this we need support from in situ measurements. And even also aloft information would be from towers or from airliners or from ships would be quite important. And I think this is where perhaps governments will not be enough to deploy a set of innovative instruments at national scales, and this is where the private sector could play a very important role.
Thank you so much. So data sharing, in particular, the metadata, is a global challenge, and that one calls for radical cooperation.
Absolutely. It's very important to be transparent about the data, but also about how we treat the data, what is the level of uncertainty, what is their quality, how standard and documented they are, and this we cannot do alone, basically.
Thank you so much. Moving now to you, Oliver. Thank you for being with us.
Sure.
When we had the initial discussion at the last summit of DESTA about the data impact initiative, we identified 4 different levels for the engagement of private sector, in particular for this initiative, which included the design and manufacturing, instrumentation, also the deployment part, then operation and maintenance, and last but not least, a very exciting one, I believe, data valorization. Now, you've been working in asset management for many years. You created a comprehensive and accessible climate and market data platform to best combine climate change and market data. And at MSCI, you now work as the global head for climate research. So, data is a big issue in your field. Where do you see the most potential for private sector engagement to really steer innovation sustainably and to really have measures in place, mechanisms in place that help us to to combat the continued increase of atmospheric greenhouse gas concentration?
Okay, that's many questions. Let me sequence it a little bit. So first of all, I work for a company called MSCI, and maybe some of you have heard about MSCI, but probably not. MSCI is a financial service provider, a financial data company, and it's, you should think very similar to Bloomberg. But the big difference is that Bloomberg is for mostly for traders, and MSCI produces what is called indices, and indices are kind of these they're theoretical portfolios which can be used as a benchmark for investments. And some of you might know the MSCI World. It's one of the most popular benchmarks in the industry. So, if you want to know how bad is inflation for the world economy, some people look at the MSCI World. So that leads to, you know, the question, why is MSCI also a climate company?
Hmm.
Well, obviously, a lot of these indices today are climate informed. A lot of investors today want to have low carbon indices. So we have about 100,000 indices, and I think about 1,000 of them are climate informed. The largest ETF ever launched in the history of ETFs was launched about 4 months ago, and it had over 1 billion US dollars in it, and it tracks a MSCI Climate Action Index that uses our data. So I run that team of about 100 researchers that produce this kind of data. So now coming back to data, I'll make you a little funny comparison. One of my big hobbies privately is music production. So I have a Spotify profile. And when you have a Spotify profile, you can check here, you have something called Artists for Spotify, and you can live check how many people are listening to your songs. I just had someone listening to my new climate song. The person is now gone. There's now zero people listening. So, well, anyhow, but when it comes to companies, let's say I want to know the emissions of an oil major, which we use in our data. It can take up to 2 years until that data is in our systems. It takes the company to do all the inventory. Then they need to report mostly to an organization. Usually it is CDP, the Carbon Disclosure Project. Then they check it. Then they publish it. Then we ingest it. Then we quality check it. It takes a long, long time. So not all companies in our system today have 2022 data. Some companies are still based on 2021 data. So you can totally see there's a huge lag in that data coming in. The second point is um, companies have every interest in the world to report the lowest number possible, and that always creates, uh, there's an incentive problem, an agency problem in companies self-reporting. So we would love to be able to model companies emissions, and we actually, when we analyze companies right now, we have about 1 million assets in our database. What that means is that we track all of the offices, the factories, the energy production facilities that companies have. For the 10,000 companies that we analyze, we have about 1 million assets. So if we had this data, that the 1 kilometer grid resolution air, like near ground CO2 data, we could model potentially, if it came from a satellite, on a very fine time resolution, we could model um, the emissions of companies, and we could give investors, and that's another point. Investors usually have a very short time scale. They don't think about the year 2100. They mostly think about the next 3 months or maybe in the next month. And they're asking us, what are the climate risks, the short term climate risks in our portfolio? And if we had more information on a shorter time scale, that'd be really helpful. So we also provide a lot of public utility. I just wanted to point that out. So, for example, you can look for about 2,000 companies. We analyzed our temperature alignment metric called implied temperature rise on our website. You can actually go there and you can look it up. And the second thing that I wanted to mention is that we publish a net zero tracker. And the net zero tracker is kind of summary of all of this information on the 10,000 companies. You know, for example, we just published one 2 weeks ago. And the result is that companies globally are on a 2.5-degree pathway. They're decarbonizing, the companies in the G20 countries are decarbonizing a little bit faster than the countries itself. That's interesting, but there's only 32 months left for those companies to, decarbonize um, before we reach 1.5 for those companies. So it's kind of the same story in that sense. And you can look at the net zero tracker if you're looking, if you're looking for high level numbers. And then the last point I wanted to make: investment is always about opportunity. And I think for stock listed companies, or also um, uh, for small and medium companies, or also startups, I think this kind of data and the measurement of this kind of data presents a gigantic opportunity,
Mhm.
um, which is maybe an opportunity that you don't think about usually as a business opportunity. In the climate change field, we think a lot about renewable energies or low carbon cement or things like that, but usually data, I think, is not one of them.
Yeah. Thank you so
I'll
much.
stop here.
Thank you so much, Oliver. And I know that you could spend as well hours too, because you can see you are passionate about the topic. Hold on the microphone. I just have a follow-up question. So I think everyone would agree that the data requires independent measures. How open do you see is the private sector? That's a very, very provocative question to that idea of open science and data sharing and complete transparency of how we got to the data. And I think the indices that you just have mentioned, they are a good example of the mechanism. But how do you guarantee now, from your perspective, that the independency of the data?
Okay, maybe I can explain a little bit how we interact with companies. So first of all, because we make a lot of this data public and because it's used by a lot of investors, companies really look at our data in great detail. And I can tell you, if they don't like it, they're going to complain. But what happens then is that they contact what is called our issuer communications team. Companies in our lingo are called issuers because they issue securities. And so they then contact our issuer relations team. So there's no, there's a Chinese wall more or less between the issuer communications team and my research team. So they can't pressure my research team directly. And I also want to point out that in a huge difference between us and rating agencies is that rating agencies have corporate clients as clients to create credit ratings. We do not at all have companies um, to create any kind of climate rating for them. We're totally independent. Now, to your question, how open are companies, in data? I think no company on this planet is interested in more disclosure requirements. So if there was an external party, that they could kind of look at, I think they'd be actually very happy. They'd be very happy that they don't have the work. I also think that companies have, when it comes to emissions, um, much less problems with disclosure because I think they see it's happening anyhow. Um, so if there was a verifiable, very transparent way, like you described, to see where the data came from, and that they can kind of interject and critique it, I think companies would be extremely willing. You shouldn't think that there's pushback, by the corporate community in general against climate transparency. I don't think that's the case.
Thank you so much, Oliver. And I think it's evident, as you just have mentioned, that measuring and reporting on finance emissions is the foundation for climate disclosure and reporting. But as you have pointed out as well, it's a quite interesting publication that just recently came out. I think that you authored on the practical considerations of calculating portfolio's carbon footprint. There are some challenges to consider, right, when quantifying financed emissions and finance emissions intensity, such as, for example, accounting standards. Now, and also quality of data. And in fact, that leads us to you, Jung Kang. Thank you for being with us today. Thank you. I'm very pleased that you're here. So you are representing the International Air Transport Association, IATA. IATA represents about 300 airlines in over 120 countries. And just to verify the number, you are promoting that it's 83% of the world's air traffic.
Yeah, all numbers are verified. Great job.
Yeah, corporate mission is to represent, but also lead and serve the airline industry. Now, you've set a very ambitious target as a company, as an association, making flying net zero by 2050. But before we talk about the specific data initiative that your organization is running, given the complexities, but also the lack of available data sources needed to accurately really calculate the CO2 emissions from aircraft, could you kind of briefly explain to our audience here and online which pathway are you currently considering as the ready to go option at IATA?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me all right from here. Yeah. And first of all, thanks for inviting IATA and also the aviation sector to share a little bit our experience in decarbonization. And then I'm also very happy to share with you how data play a role over there in our decarbonization journey. So as you said, we indeed reach a very ambitious target already the year prior to last year, that's to reach net zero emissions by 2050. And aviation, compared with other sectors, is very hard to decarbonize. So it's the unique character of that industry. Why? Because we still heavily rely on the fossil resources, and also because of the technology breakthroughs takes years. For example, all those electric aircraft and hydrogen aircraft takes years for them into enter into the operation, especially the long haul operations, because of the energy intensity. So we have very limited options over here. So now back to the question, which is the ready to go option, and it is SAF, so Sustainable Aviation Fuels. Right. And then now the current situation we're facing right now is if we're looking all those projections up to 2050, there will be 80% of carbon um, intensity reduction generated from SAF. But as of today, if we look at airlines SAF uplift, last year it's 0.1%. And this year it's 0.2%. So you see the big gap over there. So the challenge is very apparent. It's we have too little staff and the price is very expensive. So how to address those challenges? Last week I'm here in Dubai as well. We have the ICAO, so UN Special Agency in dealing with the international aviation. They have convened a conference called Conference on Aviation Alternative Fuels, and there are all the ICAO member states, that 193 member states. They've reached a midterm ambition of delivering 5% of carbon intensity reduction by 2030. So we still need a lot of ramp up in terms of supply. And we're from the industry, we're really calling for all those effective policy options that can help attract all the capitals to scale up supply and to de-risk the investment, right? And then on the other side, we also need to bring SAF into more equal footing of the renewable diesels to assist all those existing SAF or the renewable energy facilities to produce SAF. So we're now in that kind of the crossroads. We're leading for more effective policy options to make it happen. So that's where we are, the ready to go option, the challenge, and what we need more from the government.
So you're saying you're ready to go, but the supply is not enough.
Exactly. Supply is scarcity over here, and we need multiple that in a very quickly manner.
Thank you. So an immediate follow-up question to
Right.
you now. You're experimenting on this data impact protocol CO2 Connect. What can we learn from that initiative in terms of engaging stakeholders to,
Right.
for instance, valorize data?
Yeah. So maybe if I can take a step back, and apparently data play a fundamental role in our decarbonization journey because it will help us to set at the beginning the benchmarking. It will be helping us to see the projection of emission growth over the years, and also will be helping us to disclose our information like environment or emission performance to the corporate customers, to the general public, to the passengers as well. So that's whereby the CO2 Connect will be perform a role to informing the passengers what's the CO2 emissions per your journey from. For example, if you're flying a A320 from Barcelona to Montreal, what's the CO2 emissions of that journey? If you're sitting in economy class, if you're sitting in the premium economy class or the business class. So that tool will be helping informing you the exact CO2 emissions. And I'm happy to see as well, currently we're making the best use of the existing data collection mechanisms over the world. That's CORSIA, Carbon Offsetting and Reduction Scheme for International Aviation, whereby all the airlines who fly international flights are reporting their fuel consumption data through the authorities and to ICAO. And last year, the reporting standards actually is very robust. It's over 97% of that emission being reported. So that's already have a very good ground and mechanism to data collection. And then next step is how to apply or utilize all those existing data and for the CO2 Connect, for example. So how CO2 Connect kind of utilizing the existing data is by having the primary data resources submitted from airlines. So compare with, for example, all those model data, we have the raw data from airlines that are reflecting their operational situations month by month. And then we also have the industry endorsed or recognized methodologies for all those calculations to ensure the accuracy and the representativeness of those final results. So I think there is some beauty in that one.
Thank you, and I think that's very interesting for you to hear how the potential could look like for sharing data and see how to complement the different sources. Um, so let's be clear, money can help, but the engagement of the private sector has a lot of potential in steering innovation at the convergence, we would say, agenda between science but also diplomacy, as we can see with the example that you just have given on the conference that just took place. Policymakers need to be at the table to discuss the latest breakthroughs in science. Now, um, we see a strong potential in this idea of co-construction of innovation, and as we just explored the contribution of the different stakeholders. Now, let's do an experiment here. Let's imagine the map, the high resolution of the global greenhouse gas watch initiative is here. What do we do with it? How could we describe some success factors that it's really providing that systemic shift that we all would like to see in terms of decarbonization? Maybe I start with you, Chantal.
Yeah, well, if I take the example of the CO2 monitoring verification support capacity that we are building at the moment at ECMWF, and which will feed into the general framework of G3W.
Mm-hmm.
In a way, it's already happening because I was in a panel this morning in the German pavilion where there is a national initiatives which aims at really improving their reporting in the view of the global stock take in the years to come. And they are actually developing their own capacity at national level at very high resolution, but they are using the boundary condition provided by what we do. So when we will be able to provide this data in real time, which is the goal, because as Oliver mentioned, you don't want to work on data which are 2 years old or 3 years old and obsolete in the reporting. You want to have the more fresh data that you can have. So if we are able to provide them the boundary condition, then they can use and they are trusting the data, so they know the data. They because they follow standards and they follow an agreed documentation and methodology. They can use this data in all earnest, knowing the uncertainties, knowing the weaknesses, because they are documented, and then they can improve on them by downscaling, by doing AI, machine learning, whatever you can think of to reach the resolution that they need at national level or at lender level. So it is already happening, and it would be very interesting if it can be scaled up to different countries. But again, even if we have a global product at 100 or 10 or even one, um, the observations from space will never be enough. So we need really a consolidated in situ network to support this. And this is where also I can see a role of the private sector to have innovative measurements to complement what we will do from space.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. And that is actually a perfect way back to you, Oliver. Um, when we did the preparations for the panel, I really understood that you are big in innovation, and you're quite excited when you talk about different innovation that you came across. And you shared with me that in the last COP conference, you brought up in a panel discussion private sector initiatives on CO2 measurements with IoT. Could you just share your startup spirit, your experience in that field, how to actually cater to the needs of a global initiative to um, get innovation, to scale up innovation that's happening within startups around the world?
Yeah, for the last few years, I've always been thinking that one of the biggest failures, kind of the broader climate community, was that we don't have the IoT of emissions. What I mean by that is Internet of Things, right? You know, like I just said, we have all sorts of data at our fingertips, but we really don't have it on emissions. So I had this loose idea of why don't we have CO2 sensors all in our phones? Very naive, thinking. I know nothing about measurement technology, so I talked to some people at the IPCC about it, and I think obviously I wasn't the only one that had that idea. It's a very natural idea, but it's more difficult to put in practice than than you would think than other things like GPS or whatever. And so I think this project is exactly the same idea in a way. It has the same aim. So I'm very happy to see that. And I think it would the the way I usually see it, when suddenly there's data available, there's a typical evolution that is happening. So first of all, the data is available. Then everybody needs to learn it, what it actually means, what it is. Then it needs to be utilized for a certain kind of purpose. For example, let's imagine it would be utilized to control the use of fertilizers. And then there's a whole industry that develops from that. So that's where I think the power is. You would then have startups, for example, that would be specifically looking at the agricultural sector and at looking at agricultural emissions, would build products around it that would then help with decarbonization, and and that's what I'm really excited about. And I think the interesting thing is that you might think, these niches are, only a very small piece of the mosaic. But the interesting thing is that that is actually where startups can really excel by being experts in a very small niche. I think that's actually almost the secret to starting a successful company.
Mm.
And that's also why I'm so excited about this potential data set, because there's probably 1,000 niches like that, and there's very, very broad application of that data.
Thank you so much. And I see you were nodding to Oliver's comments. So um, can we say that, or do you think that such a map will lead to the systemic change from your perspective? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think in terms of what kind of data quality and then the data representativeness we're expecting, we're well, like to our industry, it's very important, I think, for the data to be verified, to be accurate, and to be trustworthy, and to be also represent the real operational situation. So that's, I think, on top of it. And I think all those mapping initiatives will be helping a lot because we're operating internationally, and then we would equally like to see from different geographical locations have the similar integrity level of data. I think that mapping exercise itself will be helping average out some of the
Mhm.
lag behind ones, some of the more advanced ones, so everyone will be eventually on the same page. I think that's definitely very helpful. And then also the data collection protocol is also essential as well to be there in place to ensure the quality.
So what I'm hearing from all the three of you is the power of having the right frameworks at the right time at hand, where we can actually guide those arising opportunities. And that's actually what we at Geneva at the Geneva Science and Diplomacy anticipated during a gesture is kind of we are providing that neutral space for the multilateral dialogue that is needed to kind of challenge each other. And we believe that um, in harnessing the outcomes of those dialogues and being ourselves a neutral platform, we can accelerate opportunities and responses to the issues ahead of us. So we I think we can summarize that effective multilateralism needs fresh approaches to private sector engagement, one that favors the radical collaboration, and we heard that I think today a lot of times that term. Um, and it really needs to bring scientists, technologists, diplomats, entrepreneurs, impact experts together to identify sustainable solutions for our future. And that's kind of introducing a paradigm shift in the way we collaborate, and that's the exciting part of our talk today, that we can already actually leverage existing work, such as the impact data impact project from the WMO. Now, I would like to give you, the audience here in the room, the opportunity to ask any question if you might have one. Just looking around. You're representing, I assume, different countries, and what our panel today is demonstrating, that the dialogue between different stakeholders can actually bring a spotlight beautiful opportunities. And I welcome you to grab a coffee or speak with us after the panel to see what your perspective is on what you just have shared. And with that, and respecting also that we were running a bit late because of the other sessions, I would say we close here. And perhaps I can ask all of you for um, your hopeful message for this dialogue. What would be your your wish in terms of scaling up uh, the work that we are doing? Maybe if Jean-Noël,
Uh,
you start first.
well, first, I'm excited by what will come from the sky in the years to come, because there are very ambitious projects that we will capitalize on, but we know that it's not enough. So engaging with the in situ observations network to make sure that using satellite observations, in situ networks. I like the notion of IoT for greenhouse gas, actually, like we do in meteorology, and modeling, where we will improve progressively. We should really be able to make a big progress in estimating uh, the CO2 emissions from the ground. So that's my hope for the next 10 years.
Thank you so much. Oliver?
Well, I'm, you know, you can probably feel I'm very excited about these new projects. I think this is specifically a data set that would be very valuable for almost everyone of the 70,000 people coming to COP here. And that's really unique. So, get involved and, try to find out how you can support this project and how you can make sure, that there's pressure to build it, because I think it's really one of the cornerstones of, the solution that we're trying to find here. So let's do it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the chance. So I'm the policy advocate. So my message would be to the policymakers, we really want to see more policies being data-driven and scientific-based data-driven. So that's on actually the flip side of the coin. If those policies are not data-driven, they tend to be very arbitrary and will be impeding the industry's pathway to net zero. Thanks.
Thank you for that very crisp summary, I think, of our discussion today. We're very grateful that you joined our talk, and very excited to continue the conversation offline. Thank you so much.